Welcome to Overcoming Physician Burnout as Health Architects, a series in which we talk about different ways that physicians can approach their clinical work to make it more rewarding and fulfilling. This is Venkatesh Ramnath. Today's episode 31, Burnout, Substance Use, and Recovery, How Health Architects View Medicine's Culture of Silence. Dr. Nishant Patel is a practicing urologist and healthcare entrepreneur dedicated to improving physician well-being and addressing the often hidden challenges of burnout, depression, and substance use in medicine. He is the founder of SafeHavenMD, a platform designed to provide confidential, peer-centered support and early intervention resources for physicians facing mental health and substance use challenges. After earning his MBA from the UC San Diego Rady School of Management, he now uses his training in business strategy and healthcare innovation to guide the development and growth of the platform. His work focuses on building scalable solutions that strengthen physician resilience while helping create a culture in medicine where seeking help is viewed as a sign of strength rather than weakness. Thank you, Nishant, for coming on to Be a Health Architect, our podcast about how to overcome physician burnout. And I would like to start by asking you about your background. I know you're a practicing urologist, but you've got a lot more work that you're doing to help others. So could you help us know who you are?
Right. Thanks, Venkatesh. Thanks for having me. I'm Nishant Patel. I am a urologist. And, my journey as a urologist has been spotted with a lot of personal struggles, namely substance use with alcohol, depression, burnout, suicidality, and I've recovered from those things. Um, and my project of Safe Haven MD is using my lived experience to try and help others going through a similar situation. During my own struggles with these things, I believed I was the only one. So isolation was the most dangerous part. But then I started hearing quiet disclosures from colleagues, a drink that became nightly, a stimulant used to push through a colleague disappearing for personal reasons. And I saw a pattern that, high functioning physicians were quietly deteriorating while maintaining outward performance. And that was me to the T. Um,
Can you give an example about that?
right. So, when I was interviewing for residency, I wanted to be a urologist, not knowing that I wanted to do it until I, did my last third year rotation. And, the collegiality, they were funny, they were, incredibly compassionate and sensitive to, some of these issues that the men and women were going through. And I just thought they were the rock stars, right? like, and, uh, and I got really drawn to it. And so it was very competitive when I was applying. I think the match rate was 70%, sometimes lower. And, I did well on my steps, got great letters, did research, but, I was uh, in severe alcohol use disorder, almost daily as a third year medical student. I had to bring it in to my white coat, empty out a water bottle and fill it with vodka, thinking this is fine. No one will know. I have to do this to get through the day. A lot of ego in there too. He's like, oh, if you only knew how hard I was working, you would do the same thing too. Just a lot of delusional thinking. So I was, you know, deteriorating, but the outward performance, or on paper at least, it seemed like it was working out fine. But eventually, with my severity, one of the two had to go, and both went for me. Um, and it was, I had to take some research years after not matching, and had a very massive DUI. Um, and it wasn't until I kind of surrendered to the process of getting help, that I was able to be on the path to recovery. Addiction is disconnection and isolation. The way these substance use disorders work is to do that, is to disconnect you from reality, is to isolate. That way it can thrive. You're fighting yourself, right? my parents were immigrants here. We grew up in a very small town in Arizona. We were one of the first Indian families there. So immediately off the bat, there was some isolation. And you can't fight isolation with isolation. I find it doesn't really work. But that's what happened. That's what happened. Um, and my first drink, I remember it felt like the answer to everything. Like, now I fit in. Now I get this warm feeling. But I did not know how to stop from the very beginning, right? I don't know, you know, there's some genetic component, there's, the way environmental components, but I was off to the races very quickly, and it was you know, dangerous from the very start. I don't know if a lot of people are like that. I hope not, at least. Um, but it's the isolation is one of the defining aspects of addiction and mental health issues.
So you started obviously with various pressures culturally, family oriented, and you said you were isolated in where you were geographically. Do you think that when you went into medicine, those things were exacerbated? Do you think they were commonly seen in others, in your peers, for example, in different ways? Like, how were they similar and different from the folks that you were interacting with during your medical school and training?
I was always the one that was way too inebriated, right? And so I was kind of isolated just from that. With my peer group, I had friends and in medical school, and I'm still friends with them now. Um, but a lot of it was, I mean, was ego driven, right? Like I could be at the top of the class, I could drink, and I could do all these things that, no one can tell me what to do. Um, and that shedding of that ego took a long time, took a long time. You have to I had to be beat into a state of reasonableness, by my own actions. But yeah, the almost narcissistic quality sometimes that you see in people using substances, thinking I could, I deserve to, let loose once in a while, or that kind of story. But yeah, I felt different, even in medical school. If that's kind of where you're going. Yeah, yeah.
And did you see others around you feel similar tendencies, or did you feel like your experience was unique?
I know I definitely, I mean, I gravitated to the people that were kind of doing the more, e- extreme drinking, and I there was some sort of camaraderie with them. But I also saw there was a lot. I mean, there's a lot of South Asians, and we all kind of have the same. I don't know, generally the same experience with the cultural expectations. I definitely felt that. There's another Indian colleague that I have that I went to medical school with, and he reached out a couple years ago because he knew about what I was trying to do, and he said, you've been so open with how you struggled. This is what I'm going through. And it's I mean, the similarities are striking sometimes.
Can
Um,
you give an example?
yeah, it's it- to get more granular, it's like, in our house, we really couldn't talk about our emotions very well. They were either, ignored, or it was like, don't worry about that, focus on your career. Um, but also find someone to marry, also get kids. Uh, and it was a very similar story, and we never stopped to ask, why do we have to do this? We just did it. It was these, almost unspoken and sometimes spoken expectations. Um, and he's doing better now, but there had to be a period of intense self-awareness, reckoning with the past, the family, um, to get to these kinds of places, and I had to do that with my own family as well. Now we have a great relationship because we talk about these things openly, and even though it's still uncomfortable for them, you know, just living on the surface with them it doesn't work anymore, right? After what I've been through.
Yeah. Do you feel like the medical system is sort of similar that way? I just feel like, while I haven't dealt with substance use the way you have, there's definitely a gravitational pull to find some escape, right? But when you're in residency or the pressures of just trying to learn as much as you need to learn and to give, there is a sense that you're left out of the mix, right? And certainly during my residency years, I remember we'd always look forward to the weekends, and some people were really known for going a little bit too far. And yet, that
Hmm.
was, like you said, there was a camaraderie there because we're all in the trenches, and it was a way that we could sort of just vouch for each other that you're not going to make it that big a deal, right? And I wonder how much of this is just what's not spoken in the medical system itself, that there are pressures. Yes, there are family pressures. Of course, there are cultural overlays of all this. But I've felt that in the medical establishment, like you said, it's not talked about. There's not a lot of awareness around it. There's a camaraderie pull that bonds us. And so I wonder how much of this is a systemic sort of issue
Hmm.
as opposed to just an individual failure.
The physicians I work with that, are vulnerable to substance use, mental health issues, I find they're very highly sensitive people at the same time. They care a lot. They are very good at what they do. They can, be very empathic. And when we get exposed to the, high achievement orientation or the sleep deprivation or, the trauma and suffering we just see in our work, the substance use comes into play. I think that's what it's our sensitivity and our desire to not feel these heavy emotions for us, right? We can hold it's I say we can hold a lot of grief in one hand and a lot of gratitude in the other, and then we're kind of stretched by those things. As physicians, I think a lot of us are expected to ignore a lot of the struggles that we go through. We are here to serve patients, and and then we start believing that, and a lot of our problems get worse. It's the kind of perfectionistic training environment, and then and we may get into this later, but it's like, wow, I have a problem, but I have a fear of professional consequences if I get help, right? The stigma. Will I work again? How will the medical boards look at me? Will I get credentialed? Unfortunately, with physicians in recovery from mental health or substance use, it is hard to shake our past no matter how much we have recovered. And these are all very real, fears, I think, of folks trying to get help. For me, what helps me is things like this, right? The awareness, the speaking about these stories that are kind of uncomfortable to hear, right? Severe substance use, suicidality. But I think if we just talk about it more openly, I think the response we'll get will be pleasantly surprised.
Yeah, you mentioned a couple of those bigger and obvious impediments are to get help and the that you felt and faced yourself personally. Can you speak to consequences of getting help?
I think so. There's the licensing disclosure fears. There's the Lorna Breen Foundation, is a kind of physician wellness advocacy group, and they are fighting hard to remove this accusatory, self-incriminating language from a lot of state licensing board questions. I mean, they did a study that like folks that actually have these issues, 50% of them say they don't on their on their forms. And so are they even helpful to have these things? Um, there may be malpractice insurance concerns. There's hospital reporting. There's professional fear of retaliation. This happens. I think this happened to me. I don't know for sure, right? Um,
What do you mean? Can you
and,
explain that a little bit more?
right, like I don't think I was a good cultural fit down at this place in the southern United States. And I felt that a story was written, to terminate me because of my mental health issues. I was going through a lot of family issues, and none of that was really taken into account, and they were kind of able to freely do it. And this happens. I mean, even in more criminal types of things where there's sexual harassment, and there's some desire to protect some people at the top. I mean, it's kind of sickening. Um, and if you're against the grain, my dad is a physician, and he's he was in the practice for 35 years. He goes, if they're going to fire you, they will find a reason to fire you, right? At these kind of more more academic institutionalized settings. And unfortunately, I think that's true. And then there's confidentiality concerns too. A lot of places have employee assistance programs, and I think those are great, to have someone you can discuss with. But I've also heard of stories where it's entirely not confidential. And I think there's a lot of hesitation, to go, to a therapist or psychiatrist that's assigned to you at your own institution. Um, for me, I didn't get the help until I told the full whole story to someone I trusted, right? It's just like in medicine. We need to know the history of the present illness as accurately as possible to help you. And when there's hesitations for all those things I listed, I find that people aren't getting the help they need because we're not diagnosing the correct problem a lot of the time. There's not a lot of peer support for, hey, I'm an alcoholic and had a DUI, or I'm very depressed and have suicidal thoughts, right? There's a lot of shame in just bringing that up, which is, any human being can suffer from these issues. But when you're the physician who's providing the care and compassion, it's almost like we're not allowed to.
Yeah.
And it's and Brene Brown, that shame shame suffers in silence. It exponentially grows in silence. The fear, the stigma, and opening up the conversation about that is the first step in reducing it, and sharing the stories of physicians struggling, but also the hope as well of coming back from these issues, helping other people. There's a whole other side to all this suffering. That's what the company SafeHavenMD is trying to achieve, is to help folks truly believe and understand there's another side to all of this.
Yeah, and I want to get to your company, Safe Haven, because I do think it offers a really important resource for folks. But I also want to ask you, do you think that there's any way around, and I know you're working on that with Safe Haven, is to try to intervene early before bad things happen. But do you feel like it's inevitable that we have to crash into a wall before we actually seek help? I know you've been pretty explicit and honest about your facing certain pretty heart-wrenching difficulties and a DUI among them. Do you think that there's a way to get
Mhm.
help before that? I mean, what do you think?
Recovery is like full of humor, and they say you don't have to reach rock bottom to get help, but it definitely helps. Um,
Right.
you know,
Yeah.
it's like, but I heard another very powerful thing. When you lose everything and you think you have nothing, then you can actually give everything. In my experience, that's how it happens a lot of the time. Early intervention is the goal, right? Using all this pain, suffering, life experience that I've had to prevent you from having to go through that, because it's terrible. Um, it would be the pinnacle, of this endeavor. And some folks that have reached out to, like, yeah, the substance use is increasing. I'm kind of showing signs of depression. No issues at work, no DUI, nothing. I'm like, oh wow, like I just want to like reach to the screen, and be like, please. But you have to want it, right? Someone in recovery told me, is like, you should use all that zeal you used to get your urology residency after the third time to try to recover from this. If you use that energy to do this kind of work, um, and I finally did, then the results you will see, you can't even imagine that right now, how
Yeah.
beneficial it would be for you. So we have the capacity, right? Obviously, but it's the idea is giving up all this, the facade of control. That way you can get the help you need. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a book, I don't know if you read Richard Rohr's Falling Upward.
Yes.
Yeah, so a great book, right? And it talks about we have to have a fall. I mean, it has to be, the point is that not that you have to have something traumatic happen to you to make any change, but change becomes more salient when you're facing something that you really just don't know what to do with. And
Yeah.
whether it's the loss of a loved one or some major professional difficulty or whatever that is, we do have to, like you said, we have to notice that we have to make a change or something has to give, and then we are primed to start listening. And we may not know the answer right away, but listening is the first step to getting somewhere. So
Mhm.
that makes a lot of sense. And so then let's talk about your company, Safe Haven MD, because
Yeah.
it sounds like you sublimated your pretty harrowing experience into something very positive for folks. So can you
Sure.
tell us about your company, Safe Haven MD, and
Yeah.
go ahead.
So, yeah. So, I guess going back to my, life story, this depression that I had, I needed ECT to come out of it. And I said, I think I'm just going to leave medicine. I was going to do some industry. I'd had experience in medical device consulting, and that was, fun actually. Um, and I got into MBA school here in San Diego. We moved back, and someone reached out for a job actually, and I'm still working that job because it's the right balance for me as a urologist, which I still enjoy doing. But for one of our healthcare classes, we were given an assignment of, creating something novel or disruptive. And I just used all my past experience. I said, what if there was a place where a physician could go? They could even go anonymously. We don't report, no fear of, professional retaliation. It's outside of wherever they're working for, and we provide peer support with people that provide the support with lived experience, i.e., me and some other folks we have on our team. After we presented in class, our professor says, you should do this. I was like, okay. Um, and then we started, building the website, doing a little bit of marketing, and we started getting calls from people. And a lot of it was the more kind of severe stuff because that's what my story is. I'm drunk at work, not great. I'm having suicidal thoughts, right? So we don't function as practitioners. We work with another service, Tend Health, that we partnered with. And even if folks need acute care, we work with some more, modern holistic places that can help folks acutely as in an inpatient setting with, physicians, therapists, case managers, even legal help, family help, even financial help, because wellness is all these things. The gap, I guess, we're trying to fill is we're more of a adjunct or a supplement, right? If you want to go through your EAP, great, but we're still here. We can even help you navigate that. If you're going to have to be monitored, and we don't try to shield you from the consequences of the things that happened. We try to be by your side while you go through these things to show it's possible. 5 years is most monitoring programs is arduous. The idea is we want to get to folks before these severe consequences happen. And that wasn't the way I learned. Any lesson that's worth a damn that I've learned has come through severe suffering and pain. My hope is that that can be used to prevent severe suffering and pain for other individuals, and really convince them that if we continue on this path, right, a lot of significant issues can happen, and we want to avoid that. So early intervention is a huge goal of ours, and it's difficult to achieve, right? I think just human nature of addiction, substance use, I have to be shown that this is not the way, rather than say, this could be a problem down the road. I should stop now. I don't know if I had that awareness, but
Well,
yeah.
so if you were going to tell somebody, hey, here are some
Mhm.
warning signs to intervene, like you said, early as opposed to when everything hits the fan, what would you
Yeah.
tell folks?
an example, maybe this will be an amalgamation of people just for confidentiality, but using substances, it increases after work, right? But then it's happening right before work, and then maybe it's happening during work, right? Um, there haven't been any complaints, there's no legal issues. But there may be issues at home where people are noticing it. There's increasing like internal discomfort with it. And that is such a good place, right? It's like, oh God, you're so lucky. If we could just help you here, right? You don't need that DUI. You don't need that arrest. You don't need that being, found at work. You don't need that, immediate leave. And that's where I think the personal stories are very helpful that we share of this is what could most certainly happen. And so what does early intervention look like? It's, peer accountability, I think, getting professional help with psychiatrists and therapy. We have, a forum and groups on the site that you can anonymously partake in, um, or not, where you can connect with other people going through this. I think, they in recovery, they say that the opposite of addiction is not physical sobriety, it is connection. We feel so disconnected when we're using, so isolated. And then when we realize, there's someone else going through almost the same exact thing I am, it just makes it so much easier to handle these things when you have that either hand of someone that's been there or someone that's going through that very same thing.
Yeah, so I want to drill down on that a bit. So I had a friend who was we were residents together, and I noticed his drinking pattern, this is alcohol, was going up. And I noticed it being more of a regularity, even without, the camaraderie aspect. There was no real, at least it just seemed to have a cadence to it and a depth to it that was concerning to me. So I tried to raise it to him, but it was kind of difficult, right? It's awkward. You're a friend. You're also, partaking to some degree. How do you have that conversation with someone where you want to confront them in a way, but you want to do it empathically? I imagine that
Hmm.
you guys are doing that as part of your service is to field some of these, canaries in the coal mine kind of thing,
Yeah,
but you don't want to push them too hard. So how do you play that balance?
I think it's, if you can frame the conversation about leading with curiosity and not necessarily accusation, leading with, compassion rather than judgment. I mean, that's all you'll feel if the hospital will comes down on you. It's all accusation, judgment, and it's being on that side. It is so frightening, right? I already feel terrible. I'm already using substances, and now I think I'm a bad doctor. I think I'm a bad person, right? And that compounds the problem. You have to frame it around, I have an illness, I have a condition, just like any other condition that all of us treat, and there is a solution, right? But it's a little different. It's a little different in that you have to want it also, right? I've never forced anybody to get help. People forced it upon me, but it wasn't until I realized for myself, um, that I really wanted a different life that I started taking these changes in, and it's frustrating, when we have folks that we're right there to intervene early, and then I don't ever hear from them again, right? They're just not ready, right? I can't force anyone to do anything, but my story, right? When I lead with the honesty of my story, the brutal honesty of it, that takes down so many barriers. And other people's stories that, we're, other physicians that we're helping that are now helping other physicians, growing this network. I feel that is one of the biggest ways to break down some of these impediments.
Yeah, I almost feel like our resilience to get through the arduous nature of becoming a doctor, whether it's medical school and training, everything else, all those resilience factors work against us when we've got something that is maladaptive, right? And
Yeah.
I wonder how much of this is our own inherent vulnerability that's just covered and buried. And so I'm wondering if you have thoughts about why it is so hard for doctors to admit that they're vulnerable. And is this a performance
Yeah.
issue? Is this an identity issue? Is it both? Is it something else? What do
Yeah.
you think?
That's a great question, right? I think it's both. I think we reward endurance and stoicism, but we don't understand that endurance borders on agony a lot of the time.
Yeah.
Um, over time, it feels almost incompatible with competence in a way. Um, I say that all my intelligence of being a urologist served me in no way in trying to become a person in recovery. I had to dumb it down. All the knowledge that I had that did not apply to taking care of my soul and spirit. I had to completely put that leave it at the door if you're going to recover from these things.
Yeah.
And then, performance identity then becomes, fused with self-worth. If I struggle, I'm weak. If I need help, I'm unsafe. And what they don't realize is that vulnerability is incredible strength rather than a liability. The honesty is incredible strength. Your ability to one day help people after you get help, it will be one of the greatest gifts of this journey. Is what I try to tell people, like, yeah, you're in it right now, but one day your story will help somebody else, right? I mean, that's what's been told to me when I was struggling. Yeah, it's a performance problem, it's an identity problem, but like the self-worth thing is like, with physicians, especially, we have to make, these RVUs, then my self-worth is, it's almost defined for us
Yeah.
a lot of the time. And we're trying to shift that conversation.
Yeah. I think that the compassion, like you said, it's so engineered to be outward facing, and we don't
Yes.
take enough time to focus it inward because we see it as a weakness. And maybe that's one of the internal commitments that you're offering is even if you have trouble to focus that light of compassion inward at first, at least use it as a way to help somebody else who might be struggling with the same thing. I love that lens you have is to say, look, we're so used to giving, at least think about giving to someone else who may be struggling with the same problem. That should be an incentive for you to focus on yourself, at least for the moment.
Yeah, that's some of the most rewarding aspects of this work is when someone I helped is able to help somebody else. And I don't even know if they're doing that, right? Like, but it doesn't matter. I did the work to help this person. And you talked about these internal commitments. Like I think hopefully I have some of those, right? I'm like committed to a trusted peer I can speak honestly with. I can call this surgeon up that I used to work with and literally tell him anything, and it's met with compassion, not judgment. I perform a self inventory. I have structured time off that is non-negotiable. Like, for example, the ACGME conference was here and I was going to have a booth, but my parents were coming in town to hang out with my kids. I was invited to a bunch of stuff. I said, I am not doing that right now. Right. It's it's the non-negotiable stuff and sticking with it. The stuff that that brings you joy, make it non-negotiable.
Wow, that is such a powerful message to end our time today with. Thank you so much, Nishant, for spending the time to share your story and the work that you do to help others through some difficult times. Wish you the best in all your work at SafeHavenMD. And for those who are listening, you can find him at safehavenmd.com with a link that will be in the show notes. Thanks again, Nishant.
Yeah, thanks for having me.